Hello and welcome to our podcast, Within the Mist, a hidden place where we walk into the dark and clouded unknown. I am your grisly host, Gary, to tell you about cryptids, ghosts, and other mysteries. Today, my maiden in perpetual peril, wife, and co-host, GoldieAnn, joins us.
Hey,
Hey, what?
I'm a self-saving princess, thank you very much.
Doesn't mean you're not always in trouble.
Oh, okay. True.
Then why would you need to be self-saving?
Yeah.
Well, before we begin, we're recording this right before I leave on Friday for the Paranormal Roundtable Conference that is being held in Dallas, Texas, or Fort Worth, Texas. Really looking forward to it. It was kind of a last-minute add-on that I was invited, and I really want to appreciate it. And hopefully you guys will check out the Facebook page for the pictures and everything of what's going on at this conference, which should be pretty amazing.
And better yet, stop by his table and go visit. Stick around and listen to him talk.
Yes, I will have a table as well as speaking at a panel, so this is a good chance for you to catch me live if you're in the Dallas-Fort Worth area, or if you were. This conference is just the beginning of a whole list of activities that we have planned. We have Paracon coming up. This will be on October 13th at the Heard Opera House. Please check our website in the show notes for details. It's free to come to. In fact, we are going to be conducting our very first live podcast at the conference for people to tell their stories, and we'll publish them on air.
Yeah, so if you're in town, come tell a story.
We love to hear your stories. And GoldieAnn would love to hear your dad jokes.
Okay.
Then after that, on October 28th, so right before Halloween, Goldie and I will be at Diane's Tea Room for ghost stories. So this is a chance for you to have dinner from 6 to 8 and hear different ghost stories about monsters, ghosts, and other mysteries.
Cool.
Then, in addition to all of that going on in October, I have 2 books that are going to be released on October 1st. I can't wait until I can publish the pre-release sales of that. First, we have Hidden Within the Mist, a collection of 30 stories that I wrote inspired on eyewitness accounts of creatures and ghost stories. Then my second book is Dad Jokes for the Paranormal Dads. And you can see how excited GoldieAnn is for that one. Is that a no? The silence is overwhelming.
No, it's actually really cute. I do like those little books. I have a few of them.
Well, hopefully this is one that you can add then.
Yeah, I don't have a paranormal one, so that's kind of cool.
Yes, because what I've done is that where you would normally read chapters in a book, this has different sections separating it between jokes that are specifically about Bigfoot, jokes that are specifically about the Loch Ness Monster, even books that'll be about the Oscar, the Pusco Monster. With dad jokes in mind, GoldieAnn.
Oh, God.
What do Winnie the Pooh,
Aw.
Attila the Hun, and Smokey the Bear have in common?
They're all furry?
Wow, harsh words for Attila.
Hey, I saw what he used to wear. He wore that big bear thing, bear coat thing. He was furry.
Well, in this case, the thing that Winnie the Pooh, Attila the Hun, and Smokey the Bear have in common is the same middle name.
I don't even know what to do with you sometimes.
Was I lying?
I don't even know how to answer this.
Just say, Gary, you are so right.
No. You might record it. You are recording this. I will not say anything that you might hold me accountable for later.
Oh, well, speaking of holding accountable, today's episode involves kidnapping and the fear of death at the hands of a monstrous creature.
What the hell? You go from Winnie the Pooh to kidnapping and death?
That's
What kind of Disney fan are you?
This isn't a Disney show.
Jesus.
These stories may be upsetting to some of our listeners.
Obviously.
We are storytellers who have gathered information on some of our favorite mysteries to bring to you. We don't attempt to scare our listeners on purpose. Well, maybe just a little. Listener discretion is always advised. But first, a word from our sponsor. Welcome back. Now, for today's sources, the original story that I'm going to tell you first appeared in the Washington, D.C. newspaper on May 11, 1901, in the edition known as the Washington Bee newspaper. Marble Falls of today is a city in Burnett County, Texas, with just over 7,000 residents. It is a beautiful area with a scenic hill country, lake activities, and local breweries.
Mm.
In addition to its local charm, it is also home to an extraordinary legend. The Kickapoo community in Marble Falls, Texas, has an age-old story of an enormous beast-like man who reigned over all of the other bears, making him their king. It was this same creature that the newspapers would report many citizens seeing it back in 1901, making it more than just a legend. This creature was reported to be massive, tall, and broad in every way, with muscles rippling beneath its shaggy fur. Its arms and legs held a human-like structure rather than a bear, and his eyes were intelligent and piercing. His face human-like, with a broad nose and thick mouth.
Okay, I think there's something seriously wrong with me.
Why do you say that?
Because I went from thinking about Winnie the Pooh to Jason Momoa.
Well, we're not discussing Winnie the Pooh nor Jason Momoa, so focus on the story.
I was.
Okay, well, focus more and get your mind off of Momoa. I can't compete. Now, on May 11th, 1901, there was news of a kidnapping that spread through the United States. The Washington Bee in D.C. was among the many newspapers to report on it. It occurred in Marble Falls, Texas, and involved Ramey Arland, a young girl taken forcibly by a wild beast man. The story was so gruesome that the local newspapers refused to give it much coverage. But join us today as we venture within the mists of Marble Falls, Texas, to give the full story of the Bear King. Chapter 1. The Disappearance.
Dun dun dun.
1901 in Marble Falls, Texas was hot, remote, and desolate. Yet there was one shining bit of joy, and her name was Ramey Arland. Ramey was a beautiful girl and the acknowledged belle of Marble Falls. She epitomized beauty with her long dark hair and raven curls, which had a life of their own, moving in a dance with the slightest Texas breeze. Her eyes were blue as the brilliant sapphires and flashing laughter and mystery. Her slender figure was always dressed impeccably, even in the simple handmade farm dresses. She had a graceful way of walking that made all of the heads turn whenever she went. She had a pleasant voice with laughter, tinkling and lilting, perfectly matching her radiant smile. On this particular day, the sun was setting, and Ramey's mother waved her out of the door, asking her to herd the sheep back into the pen for the night. With a playful sigh, she trudged towards the nearby pasture, a bucket of feed in one hand and a walking stick in the other. This was her daily ritual, nothing unusual, so she set off without complaint. A creeping dusk shadowed the Arland home. Ramey's mother was inside, busy with her chores, but a warm breeze had stirred outside, bringing a wave of anxiety. Then, just as the silence seemed overwhelming, a shrill scream broke through the open window. It was a sharp, high-pitched screech, like a combination of a child or an animal's roar, a gut-wrenching wail filling with rage. It was a piercing shriek that pierced the sky, echoing through the fields and woods and sending a chill down Ramy's mother's spine. It echoed through the dusk and filled the air with a feeling of dread that lingered in the mind and managed to silence all other sounds around it. This was a primal sound, rooted deep in the dark mysteries of the wild. The older woman scrambled out the front door, heart pounding. She heard the unmistakable chorus of cries repeat and shouts from outside her building. She realized that her worst fears were coming true. She tried to listen, and instead of the lilting tones of her daughter's voice, she heard a scream of a panther. Fear coursed through the girl's mother. Was it a mountain lion attacking her little lamb? She ran back into the house and grabbed the family shotgun from the rack on the wall. Charging back out of the front door, she fumbled to load it with trembling hands while her feet pounded against the soft ground of the woods. The distraught woman frantically surveyed the pasture. She ran her hands through her graying hair as she looked with a panic around the field, her eyes desperately searching for her daughter. She picked her way around the flocks of scattered sheep who were bleating in confusion and fear. Every blade of grass was inspected, yet there was no sign of the young girl who had been sent to retrieve them. All the mother could see was the little girl's abandoned feed bucket and a few errant strands of straw scattered on the ground. The woman closed her eyes and exhaled deeply, trying to steady her nerves. Tears rolled down the woman's face, and she hurried home, wide-eyed with fear. She knocked on all of her neighbors' doors, and she explained the situation, asking them to meet for a search party. Before long, a handful of people had gathered in the Arland home and prepared to look for the missing girl. The sun had already set when the search party went off, lanterns in hand. Through the pitch darkness, they scoured every inch of brush and tangle. The dense foliage of the trees made it difficult to make out more than a few feet ahead. They trudged through the dry grounds for hours, calling out Ramy's name, but all that came back was silence. The lanterns swept in frenzied arcs, hoping to reveal some scrap of evidence, a hint that would lead them to the girl. But there was nothing, not even the tiniest trace of clothing or drop of blood that could be found. It was as if she had vanished into thin air. The news of the daughter's disappearance spread quickly through the small town, and the mother was surrounded by worry. As night descended, she sat motionless in a rocking chair next to her daughter's empty bed, tears streaming down her face. Everyone feared the worst. Chapter 2. The Abduction. Hours earlier, Ramy had been walking along her usual route, tending to the flock, her gaze drifting over the rocky terrain. A deep rumble startled her as a large black bear lumbered onto the path before the sheep and the young girl. The bear was enormous and imposing, with thick black fur that appeared to shimmer in the setting sun. Its face was round and its muscular body was powerful yet agile. It moved surprisingly quickly, its eyes dark and alert, glinting with intelligence. Its snout held up as if to smell the air, and its large claws extended and ready to attack. It rose on its hind legs and roared, baring its teeth and sending the sheep into a panic. The bear's nostrils flared and its beady black eyes shifted nervously, deciding whether to attack. The animal quickly made up its mind, and it let out a fierce growl before turning and dropping onto all fours. It galloped off into the woods and left a flurry of leaves and dust and a frightened young girl. Raimi watched until it disappeared, and then she finally exhaled and turned back to her trembling sheep. However, the actual danger was not over. Startled this time by the rustling in the deep brush, the girl turned to see what she described as, quote, a curious-looking animal running on all 4 feet that sprang out of the chaparral onto the trail. It was not a bear. Raimi thought it looked somewhat human, although colossal and muscular, standing at least 6 feet tall with broad shoulders and a powerful chest. It was covered in long, rough hair that ranged from the light brown to dark black. Its face was wide and angular with a sharp jawline and bright, intelligent eyes. Its hands were large and robust, with long nails that curved like talons. Its mouth was open in a silent snarl, revealing sharp, yellowish teeth. It moved quickly and gracefully through the woods with an animal-like agility. Before she had a chance to scream, the creature leaped towards her. Its gangly limbs coiled around her body, bringing its face inches from hers. Its raspy breath reeked of rot and death, and its eyes were like black pits of nothingness.
Gross.
A guttural growl now escaped its lips, and the sound was like thunder rolling in the distance, shaking the very foundations of the ground. It vibrated through Raimi's body, and she felt her heart drop into her stomach as it echoed through the trees. The sound was deep and feral, like a wild beast ready to pounce on its prey. It seemed to linger in the air long after leaving the creature's mouth, a reminder of the power and the danger lurking nearby. The belle of Marble Falls trembled with fear and screamed as the massive hairy creature grabbed her. Its eyes were glinting with malice, and its saliva dripped from its jagged jaw. She was sure she was about to become dinner. Still, instead of attacking, it snatched Raimi off the ground and slung her over its shoulder. Then, effortlessly, it navigated around the fallen trees and ducked into the thicket of brambles with the young girl.
That's not creepy.
Told you this was going to be a kind of a scary story.
I was thinking more stranger danger. Creepy.
Okay.
White van, free puppies,
Well, this one didn't have free puppies or white van or balloons. Just had yellow teeth and black hair.
Oh, good Black Phone reference. Good job.
Its feet pounded against the hard ground as it was fleeing something unseen. Within moments, the two had vanished into the looming darkness of the nearby mountains. Raimi had heard legends of this creature, and the local tribesmen called it the Bear King. And it carried her for miles over jagged rocks, through dense forests, and across babbling streams for hours. Finally, it reached a crude opening in the sides of the mountain, a wretched-smelling cave where the Bear King kept its secrets safe from prying eyes. The entrance was almost obscured by rocks and patches of overgrown vegetation. The darkness of the space was oppressive, and a stale, musty air exuded from within. The entrance was foreboding, and the sense of danger was palpable. Raimi noticed a putrid stench of rotting meat and fur added to the darkness of the atmosphere.
Is it like a wet dog smell?
Very much so. Not something you can ever get used to.
At least my wet dog smells like chlorine.
This was a place of inky blackness that no human dared come close to, as even the bravest would have been taken aback by the hidden horrors lurking inside. Raimi believed that this was the end of her. The Bear King bellowed and hurled her to the ground, but she rolled quickly away. She hit the rocky ground hard, pain shooting up her limbs, but she ignored the searing ache in her side. The farm girl scrambled to her feet and sprinted full on towards the cave entrance leading to freedom. With every lunge forward, she prayed her luck would hold and she could escape. The Bear King's sharp nails tore through the air towards Raimi and hit her with a resounding crack. His movements were fast and decisive, and the blow caused the girl to cry out in pain as she was thrown to the ground. Her forehead was split open and blood ran down her face. It was hard for her to focus as tears of pain blurred her vision.
Poor little baby.
The girl stopped moving and gave herself up for lost. Chapter 3. The Escape. The hours passed slowly as the darkness of the night settled in. The sky began to light up with twinkling of stars of various colors and sizes. The full moon cast a gentle light that brightened the evening, and the stars seemed to dance across the horizon from the entrance of the cave. Raimi laid in silence, not moving an inch. Her hands were clenched in the fists as she watched the Bear King's movements become increasingly labored. His once gruff movements began to slip, and his shoulders slumped with exhaustion as he paced around her again and again. His heavy breaths fogged the air as he grunted and growled in frustration of what to do next. She realized that perhaps her death was not so inevitable. The giant of a man-beast had begun pacing the cave for hours, and his booming voice echoed off the walls. His enormous frame seemed to take up the entire shelter, threatening to strike her if she moved even in the slightest. Hours of this had passed since they began their journey to the dark depths of the cave. Sweat dripped from the Bear King's brow, and his hair-covered skin was drenched as exhaustion finally took hold. It finally forced him to collapse onto the hard ground. It succumbed to the exhaustion and drifted off into a deep sleep. Raimi continued to lay motionless, the only sound of her shallow breaths in the stale air of the cave. Minutes ticked by, and she counted each one, never moving or speaking as an eternity seemed to pass. Finally, an hour had gone by. She glanced around at the cave's darkness and shivered despite her efforts to remain still. She took a deep breath, rose from the ground quietly, and then sprinted from the den with exhaustion turning her legs to rubber. She stumbled blindly through the darkness, trying to find her way home down the sides of the mountain. Her heart pounded with fear as branches snagged at her skin and clothes as she ran. Raimi searched for a glimmer of light that would mark the path out of the forest, and every few steps she glanced behind her, searching for a sign of the Bear King. But all that greeted her were shadows and emptiness. The terrified girl took a deep breath and kept moving, hoping to find her way home before it was too late. She dared not stop for fear of being caught by the Bear King. This continued through the night. The next day after her disappearance, a hunter had spotted something out of place in the woods. It was a young girl trudging through the brush, stumbling across the terrain like someone who had been lost for days. He spotted her from a distance, and as he approached, he could see that she was dazed, exhausted, and confused. Her hair was unkempt and her clothes were disheveled. Her face was blank and expressionless. The hunter's heart sank as he realized that this must be the missing girl. It was Raimi.
Yay!
The hunter cautiously steered her through the hills and trees as they passed through the forest. As they crested a hill, her home came into view, and so did her mother. She was standing in the doorway with her hands clasped together in front of her as if in prayer, eyes wide with worry. The pair approached her slowly, not wanting to startle the little girl's worried mother, who was pacing on the porch. Ramie's trembling subsided, and her body regained its strength. Her voice grew louder as she recounted the story of her terrifying encounter with the Bear King, and how she had managed to slip away unscathed. Chapter 4. Hunting the Bear King. The hunters, after hearing Ramie's story, loaded their rifles, packed their bags with supplies, and adjusted the straps on their boots as they gathered at the mountain's base. The group of men trudged through the forest to the mountainside, and their breaths visible in the crisp morning air. Ramie led them to the secret cave obscured by leaves and vines that she had escaped from during her last trek through the wilderness. She stopped where the terrain rose steeply and pointed with a shaking finger to the jagged rock face looming in the distance, its shadow stretching like a cloak across the valley floor. "The cave is up there," she said, returning to the others. They nodded grimly, determination etched on their faces. The group entered the unknown in pursuit of the elusive beast man, bloodlust fueling their every step, and they crept through the dense woods, grasping their rifles more tightly with each and every step. As they approached the opening of the cave, they saw him, the Bear King. He loomed in front of them, its enormous fist raised as it gave out a mighty roar that shook the rocks around them. It pounded its broad chest before taking a menacingly step forward. Its black fur quivered and its teeth were sharp like knives. It snapped them together with a harsh, grinding sound at the men facing in front of it. It showed no fear, but only anger. The Bear King released an unearthly screech, deep and menacing like a panther's roar. The terrifying sound was like an invisible force waving over the men, warning them to stay away from its domain. It sent shivers down their spines as some of the men's courage faltered, and they scampered to get away from the Bear King and go back down the mountain. For the men who remained, their hands shook as they raised their rifles, taking aim at the creature. Fear crept into their hearts, but they paused, unsure who should make the first move. At that moment, none of them wanted to take the life of the magnificent Bear King. It looked so human. It was then that the Bear King rose to his full height, narrowed his eyes, and roared angrily. He bared his teeth and then charged forward with a deafening stomp. His enormous feet crushed the ground beneath him, and he raced towards the men, claws ready to strike them. A barrage of bullets slammed into the lumbering beast, bullets ricocheting off of its tough hide. After a few minutes, it eventually stumbled to its knees. The hairy, enormous creature slumped onto the ground with a heavy thud. Its fur was matted and coated in blood. It became motionless with death. Unfortunately, no one knew what to do with the Bear King's body. His remains were taken away secretly, and the whereabouts remain a mystery, as well as to the identity of what manner of man or monster it was. The Bigfoot Research Organization places Texas as the 7th most likely state where one can spot a mysterious ape-like creature known as a Bigfoot. Is it possible that what Ramie and the hunters saw that day was not a bear or a man, but a member of this shadowy species? Although there have been no further similar sightings in Marble Falls, Texas since 1901, more of these bear kings may lurk near that forest and cave.
That's crazy.
And
So
what
I've never heard this story. I mean, ever. Not even a little. And this is all factual. This isn't just a legend. This is
it was reported in a newspaper. That's as far as I can tell.
okay.
Whether or not it was true in the newspaper, that's for you to decide.
And of course, they don't know where they put the body.
Right. There's no physical evidence left. They didn't bring back a body, so there's no skull, no physical evidence of any kind of what kind of creature it was.
I mean, even with the Bigfoot, we have, evidence out there. Little bits.
Yeah, but this was also 1901, so maybe it wasn't kind of the trend at that time to collect that kind of plastered footprints and things like that.
Right.
And like I said, they thought of it more of a man than an animal, so nobody wanted to take its head to mount on a wall.
That's true. Okay. I'll give them that much.
The story has grown and has become a legend for the Marble Falls. Remember how I mentioned that the area has its own brewery?
Right.
Well, one of the areas that's a restaurant / microbrewery is the Bear King Brewery, which takes its name from this legendary creature.
Interesting.
So there's three possibilities that, there's always that the story was completely made up, but it could have been an abnormal bear. So this could have been a mutation of a bear, which are very prominent in that area.
But they would have killed the child.
Well, maybe it was going to, or maybe it was confused what to do with the child. It also could have been a wild man, someone who basically lived as a hermit in the cave, went insane, or it could have been a Bigfoot, which is, Texas doesn't get a lot of them, but it is a possibility that what they dealt with was a Bigfoot creature they've never seen before.
Well, if they're the seventh, then they get quite a bit of them.
Yeah, they get quite a few. So, but in 1901, they've never seen one before.
True.
So,
either way you put it, it's a very interesting story.
Well, I'm glad you liked it. Now, the newspaper article was very scarce on the details but the story itself is pretty much what was in the newspaper. I just added a lot of the details to make it more story-like and less newspaper-like.
Right.
So, should you find yourself on the plains of Marble Falls, Texas, perhaps you will see a bear-like creature roaming the mountains, more man than animal. You may discover the Bear King.
The Bear King.
Before we go, I want to remind everyone that we are on social media and love to hear your stories and opinions about the Bear King. You can reach us on our Facebook page, Within the Mist Podcast. We are also on Instagram and have an email at withinthemistpodcast@gmail.com for any of you who would like to share. We hope you enjoyed our story of the Bear King, and we'll come again for another episode. Until then, explore the dark, shadowy places and remain constantly curious. Goodbye, everybody.
Bye, guys.